平领域做出巨大努力。希望并相信哥伦比亚政府制定的快速反应计划能有效实施，不断释放和平与发展的红利。决议欢迎哥伦比亚政府通过对话实现更广泛和平，希望哥伦比亚政府同民族解放武装尽快恢复停火，重申愿在哥伦比亚政府与中央总参谋部达成停火协议后，考虑增加联歌团授权。中方希望有关谈判顺利推进，切实改善安全局势，扩大和平范围。决议肯定联歌团为支持落实和平协议、推进对话谈判发挥的重要作用。中方将继续支持联歌团和马歇乌特别代表有效履职，期待联歌团同哥伦比亚各方加强沟通协调，为支持哥伦比亚和平进程做出更大贡献。中方愿同国际社会一道，继续支持个人主导、个人所有的和平进程，帮助哥伦比亚人民朝着实现全面和平、稳定与发展的目标继续迈进，打造与对话化解冲突、以发展促进和平的典范。谢谢主席。
Je remercie le représentant de la Chine et je passe la parole au représentant du Japon.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank the United Kingdom as the pen holder for its efforts to incorporate recent developments into comprehensive text. Japan welcomes the Security Council's unanimous adoption of the resolution to extend the mandate of the United Nations verification mission in Colombia for another year. This decision reinforces the international community's dedication to supporting sustainable peace in Colombia. We would like to highlight the reference to three focus areas of the Peacebuilding Commission's latest written advice, in particular, namely rural reform, the ethnic chapter, and transitional justice. Japan, as a long-standing PBC member, assures the PBC carefully selected these areas based on its cross-regional and discussions at meetings requested by Colombia. The PBC's advice is also based on informal coordination among related stakeholders, as well as information gained from peace-building fund projects in Colombia, totaling over $60 million since 2014. We note the Council has expressed its serious concern on the status of the implementation of the ethnic chapter and emphasized the critical importance of implementing a comprehensive rural reform. We welcome this as a positive step forward in the Council's use of the PBC and encourage the Council members and Colombia to fully utilize the PBC's advisory, bridging and convening role, particularly in these three areas. Japan also looks forward to seeing the continued advancement of the PBC's expertise, contributing to a refined PBC advisory role and further engagements. Japan believes such cooperation will foster coherent and effective support for Colombia's comprehensive peace process. Moreover, we welcome the resolution emphasizes the mission's continued support to victims and survivors of conflict, including those affected by sexual and gender-based violence. In closing, Japan reaffirms its unwavering support for the UNBMC and remains committed to supporting Colombia's peace process. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant du Japon et je passe la parole au représentant de l'Équateur.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. El éxito de la paz en Colombia es el éxito de la región. Con estas palabras quiero dar la bienvenida al señor canciller de Colombia a esta Cámara, cuya presencia representa una clara señal política de las más altas autoridades del Estado por avanzar el proceso. Agradecemos al Reino Unido por su trabajo como proponente de esta resolución. La adopción por unanimidad de la resolución 2754 que renueva el mandato de la misión de verificación de la ONU en Colombia por 12 meses, refleja el respaldo del Consejo de Seguridad a la misión de la ONU, pero sobre todo transmite un contundente respaldo al Acuerdo de Paz de 2016 entre el Gobierno de Colombia y las FARC-EP. El mandato de la misión de verificación se ve fortalecido en puntos cruciales en la consolidación de la paz, como por ejemplo la necesidad de acelerar la implementación del capítulo étnico, capítulo muy importante y que permitiría también avanzar en uno de los aspectos fundamentales en el proceso de paz. Permite también asegurar la inclusión y la protección de las comunidades indígenas y afrodescendientes, también proteger a mujeres y niñas frente a la violencia sexual y basada en género. Asimismo, refleja la necesidad de abordar las causas subyacentes de la violencia, las causas raigales de la violencia, con el fortalecimiento de la presencia del Estado en todo el territorio, especialmente en las regiones afectadas por el conflicto y las áreas rurales, para erradicar las economías ilegales que fortalecen el delito organizado transnacional y que utilizan todas las formas de violencia contra la población civil. Esto puede concretarse con la aceleración en territorio del capítulo sobre reforma agraria. Hemos visto que las autoridades de Colombia están también avanzando de manera significativa en este proceso. Finalizo mi intervención reafirmando que Colombia no está sola en la búsqueda de la paz sostenible y digna. El Consejo de Seguridad y la comunidad internacional le acompañan. Gracias, Presidenta.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Équateur et je passe la parole à la représentante de Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and we welcome the participation of His Excellency Mr. Luis Gilbert Moreo, Minister of Foreign Affairs, in today's meeting. The A3+, namely Algeria, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Guyana, welcomes the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2754 on the extension of the mandate of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia, and thanks the United Kingdom for its dedicated efforts in delivering a consensus text. The unanimous adoption today demonstrates the Council's continued commitment to supporting the government and people of Colombia to implement the 2016 final peace agreement and achieve stable and lasting peace. As the peace agreement is approaching its 8th year of implementation, the progress achieved thus far is commendable. The A3+ believes Colombia remains a success story in progress, even with the challenges still to be surmounted. However, to maintain and accelerate this progress, efforts must be intensified, including to enhance coordination at all levels, which we hope will be achieved through the recent Rapid Response Plan. Madam President, having expressed our concern about the implementation of the ethnic chapter on a number of occasions, we welcome the inclusion of language that underlines the importance of implementing the chapter as a critical aspect of the peace agreement and hope that more impetus will be given to its implementation. We also welcome the inclusion of language on women, peace, and security, which would allow the referral of victims and survivors, including from sexual and gender-based violence, to have safe and accessible assistance. Additionally, we are pleased for the inclusion of language that acknowledges the participation of women in the peace process in Colombia, as well as the impact of the conflict on children. In closing, Madam President, the A3+ takes this opportunity to reiterate our unwavering support to the verification mission and the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Mr. Carlos Ruiz Massieu. We commend him and his team in Colombia for their very important work, their support to the people and government of Colombia as they continue the implementation of the peace agreement is crucial to lasting peace in Colombia. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de Guyana et je vais maintenant faire une déclaration en ma qualité de représentante de la Suisse. Et je voudrais aussi commencer par remercier le porte-plume, le Royaume-Uni, ainsi que toutes et tous les membres du Conseil pour les efforts déployés afin de parvenir à une décision unanime. Il s'agit là d'un signal fort pour la paix en Colombie. Je salue également la présence avec nous du ministre Murillo qui réaffirme le partenariat continu de la Colombie avec ce Conseil. La Suisse a toujours défendu la voix et la participation politique des femmes dans le processus de paix en Colombie. Nous sommes donc satisfaits d'avoir pu plaider en faveur d'un mandat soulignant le rôle de la mission dans le soutien aux victimes et aux survivantes du conflit, y compris ceux qui sont affectés par la violence sexuelle et sexiste. Veiller à ce que les victimes et les survivants et survivantes aient un accès à des services sûrs et accessibles fournis par les autorités colombiennes est essentiel pour faire progresser la justice et le traitement du passé. En outre, la communication d'informations précises sur ces incidents renforce directement la capacité de la Colombie à élaborer et à mettre en œuvre des stratégies nationales efficaces pour prévenir la violence sexuelle et sexiste, un objectif qui mérite notre soutien indéfectible. S'agissant de la dernière intervention de la Suisse sur la Colombie en tant que membre de ce Conseil, je tiens à souligner que notre engagement en faveur du processus de paix colombien restera ferme et la Suisse continuera à soutenir la pleine mise en œuvre de l'accord de paix final et assumera ses responsabilités en tant que pays garant et accompagnant des pourparlers de paix avec plaisir. Je vous remercie. Muchas gracias. Et je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence, Monsieur Luis Gilberto Murillo, ministre des Relations extérieures de la Colombie.
Su Excelencia Pascal Beresville, representante de Suiza y presidenta del Consejo de Seguridad, gracias por su constante apoyo y por siempre resaltar la centralidad de las mujeres y el empoderamiento de las mujeres en la implementación del acuerdo de paz. Su Excelencia Barbara Woodward, representante permanente del Reino Unido y también penholder de los Archivos de Colombia, gracias por su invaluable apoyo y liderazgo en el Consejo, siempre resaltando la participación de Colombia y gracias por proponer y liderar esta resolución. En nombre del Gobierno de Colombia y de la sociedad colombiana les agradecemos. Excelentísimos embajadores, representantes permanentes ante el Consejo de Seguridad, estimados y estimadas asistentes. Quisiera inicialmente resaltar la presencia de nuestro director general de Planeación Nacional de Colombia, el doctor Alexander López, quien nos acompaña hoy y quien lidera aspectos presupuestales y de financiación de la implementación del histórico acuerdo de 2016 y sobre todo el plan de aceleración de esa implementación. Agradezco a cada uno de los miembros del Consejo de Seguridad por su apoyo unánime a la paz en Colombia y a la implementación del histórico acuerdo de paz de 2016 y a la política de paz del Gobierno de Colombia, que tiene como centralidad las víctimas, tiene como centralidad los territorios, los grupos étnicos y campesinos, las mujeres, las infancias, las adolescencias y la juventud. Este respaldo cobra especial relevancia en el contexto de la COP16 de biodiversidad que en este momento se realiza en Cali, Colombia, y que tiene como énfasis la paz con la naturaleza. Ese es un espacio histórico donde el país y el mundo reafirman su compromiso con una paz que trasciende fronteras y se extiende a la preservación de nuestra biodiversidad. La paz con la naturaleza es también la paz de los pueblos. La extensión del mandato hasta el 31 de octubre de 2025 a través de la resolución 2754 es muy significativa para nosotros. Constituye una clara demostración del apoyo continuo y unánime de la comunidad internacional, especialmente de este Consejo, con la construcción de paz y la estabilidad de nuestro país. Excelencias, este año ha sido especial para la implementación del Acuerdo de Paz de 2016, especialmente ante este Consejo. Este honorable Consejo tuvo la oportunidad de visitar a Colombia y conocer de primera mano nuestros esfuerzos para este propósito. En línea con eso, les invito a que celebremos un aniversario más del Acuerdo de Paz en Oslo. Vamos a ir a Noruega, que es garante del Acuerdo de Paz, porque este ha sido un año muy especial. Y, obviamente, el gobierno nacional realizó un diagnóstico preciso y transparente sobre los avances de la implementación de lo pactado y también los desafíos. Como muestra de ello, nosotros avanzamos en la bilateralidad del acuerdo. Se contó con la participación del presidente de la República y un representante de la alta parte contratante de firmantes de paz en una de las sesiones. El presidente expuso ante ustedes los desafíos a que nos enfrentamos y anunció un plan de aceleración para superarlos. Y el pasado 15 de octubre se presentó el plan para acelerar la implementación del Acuerdo de Paz de 2016. Somos conscientes de los retos que afrontamos, pero con la misma voluntad que fue anunciada el pasado 11 de julio, estamos convencidos de nuestras apuestas para superarlos. La apuesta del Gobierno Nacional por la Paz se evidencia en las decisiones políticas y presupuestales. Para los 4 años de gobierno se estimaron inversiones por más de 14.000 millones de pesos, lo que equivale a una cifra supremamente importante para el cumplimiento del acuerdo. Y superan los 1.000 millones de dólares, los cuales con recursos dispuestos para periodos anteriores. Con corte a agosto de 2024 se observa que hemos aumentado sustancialmente la inversión y las asignaciones presupuestales a través de la Inversión Nacional para la Paz y se ha comprometido cerca del 40% de los recursos necesarios. Excelencias, la paz de Colombia es un proceso que está en movimiento y no tiene reversa. Con este propósito continuaremos trabajando para cumplir con lo pactado, transformar los territorios y territorializar la paz. La paz en Colombia no es solo un propósito nacional, sino una oportunidad que compartimos con el mundo. Tenemos al mejor aliado del mundo para construir paz en Colombia, las Naciones Unidas. Hoy tenemos ante nosotros una oportunidad única, el apoyo y la colaboración con el Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas es invaluable. Trabajamos juntos en favor de la paz para que cada paso hacia la reconciliación se traduzca en esperanza y oportunidades en el día a día de nuestra gente. Muchísimas gracias.
Je remercie Son Excellence, M. Murillo, de sa déclaration. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs ou d'oratrices inscrits sur ma liste. La séance est donc levée. Excellences, chers collègues, la 9767e séance du Conseil de sécurité est ouverte. L'ordre du jour provisoire de la présente séance est maintien de la paix et de la sécurité en Ukraine. De l'Ukraine, pardon. L'ordre du jour est adopté. Conformément à l'article 37 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite les représentantes et représentants de la Lettonie, de la République populaire démocratique de Corée et de l'Ukraine à participer à la présente séance. Il en est ainsi décidé. Et conformément à l'article 39 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite M. Miroslav Jenka, sous-secrétaire général pour l'Europe, l'Asie centrale et les Amériques au département des affaires politiques et de la consolidation de la paix et au département des opérations de paix à participer à la présente séance. Il en est ainsi décidé. Conformément à l'article 39 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite également son Excellence M. Stavros Lambrinidis, chef de la délégation de l'Union européenne auprès de l'Organisation des Nations Unies à participer à la présente séance. Il en est ainsi décidé. Le Conseil de sécurité va maintenant aborder l'examen du point 2 de l'ordre du jour. Et j'ai le plaisir de donner la parole à M. Miroslav Jenka.
Madam President, just last week we briefed this Council on the continued large-scale suffering and destruction that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, launched in violation of the UN Charter and international law, continues to inflict on the people of Ukraine. Since then, relentless Russian attacks have continued to cause further civilian casualties and additional damage to critical infrastructure across Ukraine. We once again reiterate that attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure are prohibited under international law. They are unacceptable no matter where they occur and must cease immediately. To date, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, has verified that nearly 12,000 civilians, including hundreds of children, have been killed since February 2024. Nearly 26,000 civilians have been injured. Millions remain displaced and in need of life-saving humanitarian assistance. Millions more in Ukraine remain under the threat of further displacement as a result of widespread Russian attacks, particularly in eastern and southern Ukraine. The massive damage to Ukraine's critical infrastructure, in particular energy infrastructure, risks exacerbating the already dire humanitarian conditions and access to essential services as we are entering the cold winter season. In addition to the devastating toll on civilians in Ukraine, this war continues to inflame regional and global tensions and divisions. As the Secretary General warned this Council on 24 September, the longer this tragic war continues, the greater the risk of escalation and spillover. We have followed with serious concern the recent reports of military personnel of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, being deployed to the Russian Federation, including their possible deployment to the conflict zone. The United Nations does not have any additional details on these developments and is not in a position to verify or confirm claims or reports made. Our knowledge on this topic is therefore based solely on information that is publicly available. According to media reports and statements made by officials of member states, troops from DPRK have reportedly arrived in the Russian Federation, with estimates of their size varying widely. The reports regarding the presence of DPRK troops in Russia followed the signing on 19 June 2024 in Pyongyang of the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership between the Russian Federation and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, that reportedly outlines cooperation on security and defense-related issues, among others. This treaty was ratified by the lower house of the Russian parliament, the State Duma, on 24 October. The upper house is expected to follow suit. The alleged troop deployments also follow earlier reports of the DPRK having allegedly transferred military supplies, including ballistic missiles and artillery shells, to the Russian Federation for possible use in its military operations in Ukraine. We urge all relevant actors to refrain from any steps that may lead to spillover and intensification of the war in Ukraine. In this regard, we also recall the relevant Security Council resolutions on the PRK. The question of whether the reported presence of North Korean troops in Russia might fall within the scope of these resolutions is a matter for the Security Council to determine. We reiterate our call on all countries to abide by the resolutions of the Security Council, including those concerning the DPRK. Madam President, as we have repeatedly warned, the dangerous escalatory trajectory of the war in Ukraine will only lead to further suffering, mounting destruction, and deeper geopolitical divisions that we simply cannot afford. It is therefore time for us all to redouble our efforts towards a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in Ukraine, in line with the UN Charter, international law, and resolutions of the General Assembly. The United Nations continues to support all meaningful efforts to that end. Thank you.
Je remercie M. Jenka de son exposé et je vais maintenant donner la parole aux membres du Conseil qui souhaitent faire une déclaration. Je donne la parole au représentant de la France.
Madame la Présidente, je remercie M. Jenka pour sa présentation. La France a pris connaissance des déclarations portant sur le déploiement de troupes nord-coréennes en Russie. Cela constituerait une escalade supplémentaire dans le soutien nord-coréen à la guerre d'agression menée par la Russie contre l'Ukraine. La participation de soldats nord-coréens à une guerre contre un État souverain constituerait une violation du droit international, des résolutions du Conseil de sécurité et de la Charte des Nations Unies. Il s'agirait d'un acte hostile qui aurait des conséquences directes sur la sécurité des Européens, sur la paix et la sécurité internationale, et ne ferait qu'augmenter la souffrance du peuple ukrainien. La Corée du Nord était déjà complice en raison de son soutien militaire massif à l'effort de guerre russe. L'acquisition et l'emploi avéré par la Russie de missiles nord-coréens se fait déjà en violation flagrante de résolutions adoptées par ce Conseil que la Russie a elle-même votées. Des missiles balistiques de fabrication nord-coréenne ont été utilisés pour frapper l'Ukraine, comme à Kharkiv en janvier dernier, ou encore en juillet et en août, dans des cas documentés. La France condamne ces graves agissements. Madame la Présidente, en contrepartie de ce soutien militaire, la Russie est devenue pourvoyeur d'impunité et d'assistance aux programmes illégaux d'armes de destruction massive de la Corée du Nord. Cela représente une menace de plus en plus évidente pour la sécurité internationale. En mars dernier, la Russie a mis seul son veto à la reconduction du groupe d'experts du comité 17-18 qui avait été renouvelé par consensus pendant 15 ans. Elle a ainsi privé tous les États membres d'une source d'information essentielle sur la mise en œuvre des résolutions de ce Conseil. Pour la poursuite de sa guerre illégale, la Russie tente de compromettre le régime international de non-prolifération, élément essentiel de la sécurité internationale. L'accroissement du soutien militaire nord-coréen traduit aussi la faiblesse de la Russie, qui cherche par tous les moyens, avec la Corée du Nord, avec l'Iran, à poursuivre son agression avec les conséquences délétères que nous connaissons pour l'ensemble de la communauté internationale. C'est elle seule qui a choisi de déclencher cette guerre et qui est responsable de ce drame humain. Alors qu'elle pourrait y mettre un terme sans préjudice pour sa propre sécurité, elle s'obstine à la poursuivre et continue de faire le choix de l'escalade. C'est elle qui choisit, pour soutenir son effort de guerre, de nouer des coopérations militaires qui contreviennent aux règles internationales, à ses propres engagements et mettent en péril les normes de non-prolifération et compromettent sa crédibilité en tant que membre permanent de ce Conseil. Il est très clair que la Russie ne recherche pas la paix, mais la capitulation de l'agressé. Cela ne peut en aucun cas être le fondement d'une paix juste et durable, seule à même de rétablir de manière pérenne la sécurité et la stabilité. Et nul ne peut laisser la Russie saper ainsi les fondements de l'ordre international. Nous appelons encore une fois la Russie à mettre un terme à sa guerre d'agression et nous exhortons la Russie et la Corée du Nord à se conformer à leurs obligations internationales, notamment aux résolutions de ce Conseil. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie le représentant de la France et je passe la parole au représentant du Japon.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank SG Jenka for the briefing. We are grateful and support for the initiative taken by Ukraine to discuss these issues on the military cooperation between Russia and North Korea in the war of aggression against Ukraine. Today, we have the opportunity to let the international community know the facts and truth of what is happening on the ground and share the understanding on how Russia and North Korea are deepening military cooperation and breaching international law in Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. Madam President, the story of cooperation between Russia and North Korea did not begin just recently. Taking one example, it was about half a year ago that 1718 committee panel of experts was forced to terminate its mandate due to the regrettable veto by Russia, which was clearly intended to give breathing space for North Korea. Just a couple of months after the veto, Russia and North Korea signed the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, which highlights the increasing cooperation between Russia and North Korea. The Security Council discussed the military cooperation between Russia and North Korea in June this year in light of clear violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. We have repeatedly and strongly condemned Russia's procurement of ballistic missiles from North Korea to use against Ukraine. Yet, military cooperation between the two has only accelerated. Last month, Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov publicly stated that applying the term denuclearization to DPRK no longer makes any sense. This is off the table. He publicly denied the goals established by the multiple Security Council resolutions that Russia itself has supported. This represents an endorsement of North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile development and undermines the international non-proliferation regime, which is absolutely unacceptable. The discussion last week on maintenance of peace and security of Ukraine, where many Council members showed their grave concern about the mobilization of North Korea's soldiers to the battlefield, is still fresh in our minds. Japan has confirmed information sufficient for us to believe the North Korea's soldiers have been dispatched to Russia and have engaged in military training. This constitutes a blatant violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. We are closely monitoring this development with serious concern, including the imminent risk that these troops may take direct part in Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which would constitute a grave violation of international law, including the UN Charter. Madam President, President Putin did not rule out the possibility of advancing cooperation with North Korea in military technology during his visit to Pyongyang last June. This is totally unacceptable behavior for a responsible permanent member of the Security Council to engage in. we continue to closely monitor what Russia provides to North Korea in return. We, the Council members, have an essential role in maintaining international peace and security, including a global non-proliferation regime that all member states are committed to. Any Council member should not dilute our role in this regard. North Korea becoming an accomplice to Russia's unprovoked aggression will worsen the situation in Ukraine, and we cannot just overlook the situation where the relevant Security Council resolutions have been repeatedly and flagrantly violated by them. We must act to stop this. Let me once again call on all UN member states to abide by their obligations under all relevant Security Council resolutions, and permanent members of the Security Council in particular should never fail to do so. Failure to do so will jeopardize the system for international peace and security, which was established by the UN Charter and has been in effect for 8 decades. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant du Japon et je passe la parole au représentant de la République de Corée.
Thank you, Madam President. I extend my gratitude to A.S. Zhenka for his briefing. Today we gather here in this August Council to address a grave and unprecedented development in Russia's ongoing war of aggression in Ukraine. Even though we are all familiar with DPRK's illegal and immoral activities, whether WMD development in flagrant violation of Security Council resolutions, counterfeiting, money laundering, drug trafficking, cyber hacking, or systematic human rights abuses, the recent turn of events is indeed surprising, even to long-time North Korea watchers like me. Besides providing deadly munitions and ballistic missiles to Russia, the DPRK is now deploying thousands of its own troops to Russia, disguised as Russian soldiers. The Republic of Korea provided an early warning on the DPRK's direct involvement in the war. We have repeatedly warned against the DPRK's provision of military materials to Russia, and we also released detailed information on the dispatch of North Korean troops to Russia. Our repeated warnings and condemnations, however, have fallen on deaf ears of North Korea and Russia, who both completely denied their collusion until just recently. Now they are acknowledging what they are doing by arguing that their activities will be in conformity with regulations of international law. Their change of attitude, though belated and reluctant, implies that they are clearly aware that these activities are in fact illegal and unjust. Otherwise, they would not have so strongly denied them in the first place. Without clear evidence, they would have continued denying or shifting blame on us, as we have witnessed time and time again over the years. Madam President, regardless of what is written on the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty between Moscow and Pyongyang, signed in June this year, their military cooperation is totally illegal. To begin with, supporting an act of aggression which completely violates the principles of the UN Charter is illegal. In addition, Security Council resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270 prohibit any transfer of weapons, ammunition, or related training, advice, services, or assistance from and to the DPRK. Hosting of trainers, advisors, or other officials for military training purposes is also prohibited. Taken together, any activities that are entailed with the DPRK's dispatch of troops to Russia are clear violations of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. Madam President, the deployment of DPRK troops to the front line in Russia's war against Ukraine could take place sooner than expected. This marks a dramatic escalation in the war. According to some assessments, over 600,000 Russian troops have been killed or wounded since the start of the war. The reality is that Russia needs more soldiers to feed its war machine. And we all know what will happen to these ill-fated North Korean soldiers once they are deployed to the deadly battlefield. As legitimate military targets, they will end up as mere cannon fodder, while the wages they are supposed to receive from Russia will end up squarely in Kim Jong-un's pocket. I do personally feel pity for these soldiers as a fellow Korean. It is tragic that they could have enjoyed a far better life only if they were born south of the DMZ. Pyongyang's treatment of its young soldiers, its own people as expendable, will be never forgiven. Madam President, with boots on the ground, alongside the supply of munitions, the DPRK has become the most visible, ardent, and committed supporter of Russia's aggression in Europe. The deepening illegal military cooperation between Russia and North Korea poses a serious threat to both Europe and Northeast Asia. Indeed, this unprecedented military support from Pyongyang to Moscow will change the dynamic of geopolitics on both east and west sides of the Eurasian continent. It will also have serious military and security impacts on the Korean Peninsula. By sending its troops to the battlefield, North Korea will gain combat experience of modern warfare for the first time since the Korean War. The North Korean regime will naturally seek to exact a high payoff from Moscow, and such a quid pro quo will not be limited to such things as food or fuel, but may entail more sophisticated high-end military technology, material, and equipment in support of Pyongyang's military objectives. In addition, Russian Foreign Minister recently asserted that North Korea's denuclearization is a closed issue. If Russia abandons its long-held official position of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, it will undermine the very foundation of the NPT regime. The consequences of losing the hard-earned non-proliferation regime will be felt by everyone, including Russia itself. Russia already dissolved the 1718 Committee's panel of experts to hide its own illegal activities. The subsequent acceleration of military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang further endangers peace and stability in the wider region. Madam President, Russia must stop the unprovoked war, immediately withdraw its troops from Ukraine, and respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine in line with the UN Charter. Russia's desperate situation, revealed by bringing in foreign troops and munitions from the DPRK, is its own creation. A permanent member of the Security Council must at least stick to the bare minimum of international norms. The Republic of Korea, in close cooperation with the international community, will respond resolutely to unlawful Russia-DPRK military cooperation and will take corresponding measures commensurate to ensuing developments. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant de la République de Corée et je passe la parole au représentant de la Slovénie.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Jenča for his briefing on this matter. Madam President, we find ourselves in a dangerous territory. We have witnessed escalation of this war throughout the past months, which resulted in unparalleled destruction of critical civilian infrastructure and tremendous suffering of the civilian population. In spring, Russia virtually eliminated Ukraine's energy generation capacities and the related infrastructure. The outcome is already visible, and this will further aggravate the humanitarian situation for millions of Ukrainians during the coming winter months. At the same time, trends are showing considerably higher civilian casualties, making September, with more than 1,400 civilian casualties, the bloodiest month of this year. The most horrible war Europe has seen in decades, joined by two other major conflicts in Africa and the Middle East, tends to make us immune to surprises, no matter the developments we see every day. However, even in these grim circumstances, no one could have prepared us for the next step, which is deployment of North Korean army to fight in Europe, participating in a war of aggression against Ukraine. Let that sink in. North Korean army fighting in Europe for somebody else's interests. This comes on top of growing evidence of missile transfers from DPRK to Russia, their use in Ukraine, and deeply concerning statements by the Russian leadership about DPRK's nuclear status that are clearly undermining the global non-proliferation regime. The ongoing military cooperation and arms transfers between Russia and DPRK must cease immediately. Resolutions of the Security Council are binding and must be respected. We condemn this escalation as it represents a particularly dark turn of events with dangerous consequences for the state of international peace and security. Madam President, as a Security Council member coming from the region where this war is unfolding, we found ourselves in a formidable position. We are part of the most powerful body in the world, tasked with upholding international peace and security, that is evidently unable to do anything to end the suffering of civilians, unable to do anything about implications for regional and global security. I will not ask this Council to reflect about the trajectory this war is taking. We are already past that point. A time has come for the Council to ask ourselves how much of the international security architecture based on the UN Charter we are willing to sacrifice for allowing this war to drag on. The integrity of the UN and global peace and security are at stake. Silence is assent. Slovenia will not stay silent. We will concentrate our efforts into preventing further escalation and in achieving just and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Slovénie et je passe la parole à la représentante du Royaume-Uni.
Thank you, President, and I thank ASD Jenča for his briefing. When Russia invaded Ukraine almost 1,000 days ago, the General Assembly was clear in its condemnation. It deplored Russia's aggression in the strongest terms, demanded its full withdrawal, and declared Russia's invasion to be in violation of the UN Charter. Only 5 countries voted against, including the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Today, the DPRK's support for Russia goes even further. Pyongyang provides significant support to Russia by supplying munitions, arms, and other materiel. And now, 10,000 troops have arrived in Russia, with a significant number believed to be deploying to Kursk. In addition to aiding Russia's ongoing violation of the UN Charter and a UN member state's sovereignty and territorial integrity, this cooperation between Russia and the DPRK is a direct violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. Russia voted for these resolutions. Now, it violates them. This undermines not only international peace and security, but also the Security Council itself. Council members have repeatedly condemned these violations, yet the transfers continue. This latest development, Russia's training and deployment of DPRK troops, is a significant step further for both countries. Russia has now suffered over 600,000 casualties. Instead of sending other countries' sons to die for the imperialistic whims of one man, they should end the war now. Russia is not just paying for this invasion in the lives of young men. Defence and security will consume over 40% of state spending next year. We can be sure that DPRK will be extracting a high price from Russia in return for the transfer of its troops, including military assistance. This risks further raising tensions on the Korean Peninsula and undermining regional security in the Indo-Pacific. A DPRK with improved military technology and enhanced capacity to export weapons could fuel instability in vulnerable conflict areas around the world. An escalation of violence and expansion of the battlefield is in no one's interest. It is clear that a desperate and impoverished Russia needs external support for this war to continue. Any country providing assistance to Russia's aggression is thereby prolonging Russia's illegal war. But Russia's desperation will not deter our resolve to support Ukraine to exercise its right to self-defense in line with the UN Charter and to protect their people and sovereignty. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante du Royaume-Uni et je passe la parole à au représentant des États-Unis.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Assistant Secretary General Gensha, for your briefing. For 979 days, Russia has waged a brutal, full-scale war against a fellow UN member state and its people. And with each passing day, as Russia suffers immense losses, the Kremlin has grown increasingly desperate. Inviting North Korea to join its war would be a brazen escalation of Russia's aggression and a threat to global safety and security. The United States has seen additional reporting indicating that North Korean soldiers have started arriving in Western Russia. We believe the DPRK has sent around 10,000 soldiers to train in Eastern Russia, and that they will probably augment Russian forces near Ukraine in the next several weeks. A portion of those soldiers have already moved closer to Ukraine. We are increasingly concerned Russia intends to use these soldiers in combat or to support combat operations against Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk Oblast near the border with Ukraine. We are watching closely for such indications and consulting with our Ukrainian partners. We urge Russia not to take these steps. Should DPRK soldiers be used in the battlefield, this would mark a further and serious escalation of the conflict. The decision to deploy North Korean soldiers would also be an inescapably clear demonstration that Russia is growing more desperate, having already suffered more than 500,000 casualties. Russia knows the DPRK threatens peace and security in the region. The Kremlin knows the DPRK's unlawful ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs undermine the non-proliferation regime that has helped to keep the world safe from nuclear war for decades. Russia knows the DPRK is a pariah with one of the world's worst human rights records. Russia would not turn to the DPRK for a military alliance unless it were desperate and had run out of options. Madam President, just a few years ago, Russia supported multiple Security Council resolutions prohibiting both arms transfers involving North Korea and provision of military assistance to North Korea. Russia's training of DPRK soldiers involving arms or related materiel is a violation of Security Council Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. Each of those resolutions imposed restrictions on military cooperation with the DPRK because the DPRK's actions, including its unlawful nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs, threaten peace and security. Now, Moscow is not only engaging in both of those activities to support its unprovoked war, but has signed a mutual defense agreement with Pyongyang. This council, including the Russian Federation, also imposed arms embargoes on Iran and the DPRK to deter those countries' unlawful weapons of mass destruction programs. We question what Russia must be giving to the DPRK and Iran in return for their assistance. At a minimum, we know Russia is blocking the DPRK Sanctions Committee from operating. That committee is a safeguard against the DPRK's development of nuclear weapons. Russia's increasing military dependence on Iran and the DPRK is endangering the world, particularly by increasing DPRK and Iran's ability to threaten the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East on a catastrophic level. Russia must stop. It is not too late for Russia to reverse its illegal and dangerous course and end the war. It is not too late for Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine, rejoin the world community, and begin to repair its global standing. Absent Russia's will, the international community must act to protect Ukraine from Russia and North Korea. A North Korean-backed Russian victory in Ukraine, even a partial one, would dangerously destabilize the world. So let me be clear. Even with the addition of North Korean troops, Russian forces will not prevail against Ukraine. We will stand with Ukraine. We will stand with the Charter. We will stand with the rule-based system and the principles that keep us safe. We will protect them, whatever it takes. Our resolve is firm. Have no doubt. There is only one safe solution to Russia's aggression: its complete withdrawal from Ukraine. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant des États-Unis et je passe la parole à la représentante de Malte.
Thank you, President, and I also thank ASG Yencha for their briefing. Malta has joined other Council members in supporting Ukraine's call for today's meeting because we too are deeply worried, for various reasons, about the recent potential deployment of around 12,000 North Korean soldiers to the Russian Federation. First, such military cooperation represents a dangerous escalation and is a serious threat to the security of Europe and the Indo-Pacific. Second, it constitutes a violation of Security Council resolutions. Third, it adds yet another dimension to a conflict that has already been going on for 2.5 years, widening it further. Such reckless and provocative actions are just the latest in a long string of the decisions that have emboldened the aggressor, prolonged the conflict, and compounded the suffering of the Ukrainian population. Let us not forget about the recent transfer of weapons and ammunition from Iran and blockade to the Russian Federation, some of which was also a breach of Security Council resolutions. We call on the DPRK and other states to stop supporting and enabling Russia's illegal war of aggression, and to refrain from any measures aiming at further fueling conflict. President, over the past few months, we have also witnessed a significant increase in missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. These strikes have led to more civilian deaths and injuries, and have added more pressure on an already dire humanitarian situation. Ensuring the protection of humanitarian space across Ukraine is essential. We express our concern over the incidents of violence against humanitarian workers and damage to humanitarian hubs and assets in the vicinity of the front line. We again call for all parties to ensure the safety and security of all UN and humanitarian personnel and facilitate their life-saving operations. The situation of children in temporarily controlled or occupied territories of Ukraine remains dire, and the need of more humanitarian support. Moreover, unrelenting attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, in particular on energy infrastructure, continue to have a direct impact on Ukraine's social and economic development and on preparations for the upcoming winter months. We reiterate in no uncertain terms that all parties to the conflict must uphold IHL and the principles of distinction and proportionality. President, the world cannot afford to lose sight of the conflict in Ukraine. Wars of aggression constitute a serious violation of the UN Charter. They are an affront to the principles and values that unite us. They must never be normalized, justified, or rationalized. A world in which might is right is something that we can never accept. We must therefore focus our energies to reach a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. This senseless and unjustified war must be brought to an end. The Russian Federation must withdraw all its troops from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be restored. Until that day comes, Ukraine has a right to defend itself in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de Malte et je passe la parole au représentant du Mozambique.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Jenča for his favorable insights. And I also acknowledge the presence of the permanent representative of Ukraine at this meeting. Madam President, the concurrent sessions before us today and tomorrow reflect the concerning pattern of the escalation that has come to characterize not only this conflict, but also our deliberations in this chamber, edging us dangerously toward a profound global division. Despite global appeals for peace, we witness continued intensification of hostilities, exposing an alarming trend toward confrontation over resolution of the conflict. Since this conflict emerged, Mozambique has consistently urged all parties, including their allies, to refrain from aggressive posturing predicated on the assumption of unilateral advantage. Historical evidence consistently demonstrates that pursuing peace through military escalation rarely achieves lasting stability. Past conflict reveal that sustained military-focused strategies only deepen hostilities, amplify human suffering, and render diplomatic solutions even more elusive. History, especially Europe's own conflict-laden past, clearly demonstrates that conflicts driven by sequential retaliations, such as alliances fortification and third-party military involvement, often spiral beyond the control or original intention of the warring parties. Madam President, international law indeed recognizes the sovereign prerogative of states to forge alliances and partnership. Nevertheless, this right must be exercised in accordance with the UN Charter's foundational pledge to shield future generations from warfare's devastations and serving to reinforce international stability rather than compromise it. Madam President, this conflict stands at a critical crossroads, showing alarming indications of expansion beyond Ukraine's borders, endangering both regional and global stability. The alleged deployment of third-party forces marks a dangerous inflection point, heightening tensions and raising the stakes for all parties involved. We are reminded of Sun Tzu, timeless wisdom that, and I quote, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battles," end quote. It's a principle that emphasizes the paramount importance of diplomatic engagement and strategic restraint over military escalation. If there should be a battle, it should be for preserving pathways to sustainable peace. Mozambique, therefore, calls upon all parties to commit to immediate de-escalation. In accordance with the principle enshrined in the UN Charter, Mozambique firmly advocates for a negotiated resolution of this conflict. We call for an immediate ceasefire and the swift resumption of direct dialogue conducted in good faith to pave the way for enduring peace. The long-suffering populations and future generations deserve this mark of consideration. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant du Mozambique et je passe la parole au représentant de la Fédération de Russie.
Госпожа председатель, узнав о запросе сегодняшнего заседания Совета Безопасности, мы, честно говоря, лишний раз поразились циничности и беспардонности наших западных коллег и их вопиющим двойным стандартам. Мы прекрасно понимаем, что ситуация на фронте для режима Зеленского настолько катастрофична, особенно после его бесславной курской авантюры, спровоцировавшей обрушение позиций ВСУ в Донбассе, что перед его западными кураторами стоит задача любой ценой забить этот неблагоприятный фон, который может повлиять на настроение избирателей в их странах. Но нам казалось, что все-таки даже для них, давно и беззастенчиво оперирующими доказательствами в духе highly likely, существуют какие-то пределы по продвижению откровенной дезинформации. Как оказалось, таковых нет. И Вашингтон, Лондон и же с ними сегодня пробили в этом зале очередное дно. Когда-то тут утверждали, что мы разбираем стиральные машины и другую бытовую технику на микрочипы, поскольку ракет у нас остается на 1-2 дня. Потом пытались заставить весь мир поверить, что мы насилуем младенцев ложками и отлавливаем людей на улицах, поскольку никто не хочет идти воевать. Буча, Краматорск, Мариупольский драмтеатр, Спасо-Преображенский собор в Одессе – все это откровенное вранье, распространяемое с целью очернить российские вооруженные силы, войдет золотыми буквами в учебники по дезинформации и пропаганде. Так же, как они уже стали нарицательными для топорных и неубедительных провокаций Запада, осуществляемых в попытке скрыть преступления своих подельников в Киеве. Хочу поблагодарить посла Вудвард за ее трогательную заботу о российском бюджете. Она же употребила словосочетание «impoverished Russia». Хочу пригласить поспреда Соединенного Королевства в Россию, чтобы она убедила в своих высказываниях своими глазами. Только боюсь, что то, что вы увидите, вас разочарует, потому что ваши характеристики явно противоречат. Появление в этом ряду утверждения о переброске на украинский фронт военнослужащих КНДР никого не должно удивить. Все эти случаи объединяет одно – голословное утверждение отсутствия каких-либо маломальских убедительных доказательств и стремление отвлечь внимание от действительно существенных проблем, представляющих собой угрозу международному миру и безопасности. В этом мы лишний раз убеждаемся сегодня, выслушивая стенания Соединенных Штатов и их сателлитов. Видим в разыгранном сегодня перед нами спектакле единственную задачу – попытаться задним числом оправдать собственное решение отправить войска НАТО для поддержания режима просроченного киевского диктатора на плаву. Скрыть факты появления на территории подконтрольной киевскому режиму натовских солдат и специалистов, как бы они ни были замаскированы и какие бы легенды им не выдумывались, уже попросту невозможно. Иностранцы уничтожаются десятками и сотнями ежедневно, берутся в плен, фигурируют на видеороликах среди солдат ВСУ. Все чаще появляются некрологи высокопоставленных натовских офицеров или военных специалистов, которые якобы трагически погибли, гуляя в горах, или скоропостижно скончались от сердечного приступа, а на самом деле были ликвидированы в ходе уничтожения командных пунктов, учебных баз и военных предприятий на территории Украины. Отмечаем также, что истерика вокруг северокорейской темы удивительным образом совпала с подписанием Зеленским указа, согласно которому иностранным гражданам и лицам без гражданства разрешается проходить службу в ВСУ на командных должностях. Я не буду говорить здесь о продолжающейся накачке киевского режима оружием и развединформацией, без которой Зеленский и его преступные клики уже попросту не могут воевать. Об этом мы подробно поговорим завтра в ходе отдельного заседания. Хочу задать один очень простой вопрос. Даже если представить себе, что все то, что утверждают о военном сотрудничестве России и КНДР наши западные коллеги, вдруг оказалось бы правдой, почему Соединенные Штаты и их союзники пытаются навязать всему миру гнилую логику о том, что они имеют право помогать режиму Зеленского? мобилизуя для этого весь военный и разведывательный потенциал НАТО. А союзники России делать этого права не имеют. Откуда, дамы и господа, у вас это неколониальное ощущение собственной исключительности и безнаказанности, ничем не обоснованная вера в то, что можно вам, нельзя другим? Мы знаем ваш лукавый и не раз скомпрометированный нарратив о том, что Украина, дескать, жертва, а Россия агрессор. Он срабатывает только для тех, кто вообще не имеет никакого представления об истории украинского кризиса или сознательно не хочет ее воспринимать. Однако все наши разумные, вменяемые коллеги прекрасно понимают, что наше СВО на Украине никогда не было бы, если бы киевский режим после майданного антиконституционного госпереворота, срежиссированного все тем же Западом, не развязал бы войну против мирных жителей Донбасса, а потом, получив достойный отпор, не саботировал бы выполнение утвержденных резолюций Совета Безопасности Минской договоренности. То, какая Украина на самом деле жертва, весь мир увидел в августе, когда неонацистские банды Зеленского неспровоцированно напали на приграничный мирный российский регион. Интернет наводнен свидетельствами того, как эти бандиты в погонах сознательно убивали мирных россиян, не щадя ни женщин, ни детей, ни стариков, целенаправленно целились в гражданские автомобили и машины скорой помощи, насиловали, мародерствовали, уничтожали мирные дома и скот. Доля иностранных наемников среди них, в первую очередь польских, американских и британских, кстати сказать, просто зашкаливает. Это их вы сейчас нам пытаетесь выставить в качестве жертв российской агрессии, имеющих право на самооборону. Эти преступления и свидетельства о них мы подробно демонстрировали на заседании Совета Безопасности по формуле Ария 25 октября. А ваши представители пришли с заранее заготовленными речами, полностью игнорирующими только что увиденную реальность. Это верх цинизма. Коллеги, наказание за свою не достигшую ни одной поставленной цели, безрассудную и фатальную курскую авантюру Зеленский сейчас получает сполна. А вот вам, господа, пора бы уже адаптировать свои наговорники и завести что-нибудь поизысканнее, а то уж больно неубедительно все это звучит. И отвлечь внимание от этого обнажившегося для всего мира истинного лица, а точнее звериного оскала хунты Зеленского, у вас не получится. Госпожа председатель, в вопросах сотрудничества с Пхеньяном наша позиция абсолютно честна и открыта. КНДР – наш добрый сосед и близкий партнер, с которым мы развиваем отношения во многих областях. Наше взаимодействие носит транспарентный характер. В его рамках проводятся визиты, заключаются международные договоры, подписываются коммерческие контракты в различных областях двустороннего взаимодействия. Это наше суверенное право. Хотел бы подчеркнуть, что российское взаимодействие с КНДР и в военной и в других сферах соответствует международному праву и не нарушает его. Оно не направлено против третьих стран, не представляет никакой угрозы для государств региона или международного сообщества. Мы намерены развивать это сотрудничество и впредь, и никто не может нам это запретить. Как вы знаете, 19 июня был подписан договор о всеобъемлющем стратегическом партнерстве между Российской Федерацией и КНДР. Это стало закономерным следствием выхода традиционных отношений братской дружбы и всестороннего сотрудничества между нашими странами на беспрецедентно высокий уровень, а также геополитических трансформаций, которые в интересах взаимовыгодного двустороннего взаимодействия требуют качественного обновления его правовых основ. Договор не является секретным, весь его текст опубликован. В нем заложены базовые принципы дальнейшего развития российско-корейских связей, нацеленных на углубление партнерства и стратегической кооперации по широкому спектру приоритетных для двух государств направлений. Построение справедливой международной системы. Вы все можете в этом убедиться, сами прочитав договор. Поэтому нет никаких абсолютно оснований, кроме установок наших западных коллег, выставлять наше сотрудничество с КНДР в качестве угрозы кому бы то ни было. Госпожа председатель, видим в сегодняшнем западном шоу ВСБ и еще одну задачу. Думаю, ни для кого не секрет, что западные подельники режима Зеленского уже более 2 лет пытаются склонить руководство Республики Корея к более активному военно-техническому сотрудничеству с киевским режимом, побудить его, поставлять ему крайне востребованные летальные вооружения. Здесь антипхеньянская шумиха Вашингтону, Лондону и Брюсселе как раз очень кстати, ведь собственные запасы киевский режим у них почти уже до конца высосал. Надеемся, что у наших южнокорейских коллег хватит мудрости на эту уловку не повестись. Во всяком случае, могу вас заверить, что мы, несмотря на текущий непростой период, стремимся сохранить предпосылки для возобновления традиционных добрососедских отношений между Москвой и Сеулом и ценим проявляемую вами сдержанность. На оптимистичный лад настраивают и опросы общественного мнения в вашей стране, которые показывают, что вовлечение Республики Корея в украинский конфликт не хочет подавляющее большинство населения. Благодарю вас.
Je remercie le représentant de la Fédération de Russie et je passe la parole au représentant de la Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Mr. Miroslav Jencha, Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia and the Americas, for his briefing. We welcome the presence of the permanent representative of Ukraine in this meeting. Sierra Leone remains deeply concerned about the escalating conflict in Ukraine, which has persisted for over 2.5 years. Recent intensification in fighting has resulted in further occupation of Ukrainian villages and regained territory in the Kursk region. We take note of Ukraine's letter dated 25 October 2024, alleging the deployment of military personnel of Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Ukraine has based its claim on intelligence reports and open source information. While these reports are allegations at this stage, they serve as a stark reminder of the broader destabilizing impact this conflict could have on regional and international peace. It is thus important to emphasize at this juncture the need for parties to the conflict to abide by international law and relevant Security Council resolutions. Madam President, Sierra Leone, having traversed its own path from conflict to peace, values the importance of dialogue, diplomacy, and adherence to international norms. We urge all parties to the conflict to exercise restraint and to engage in constructive dialogue to prevent any further escalation of the current situation. The conflict in Ukraine has already caused tremendous civilian suffering and disrupted essential services. It is imperative that we prioritize humanitarian considerations and the protection of civilians who invariably bear the brunt of this catastrophic conflict. Furthermore, we call on all member states to recommit to their obligations under international law, ensuring that any actions taken are in full compliance with the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. In this regard, the role of multilateral fora and mechanisms for dialogue becomes ever more critical. We also note the importance of good offices and the role the United Nations can play to establish lines of engagement. Sierra Leone also recognizes the importance of collaboration among nations to alleviate potential flashpoints. We encourage all stakeholders to engage in transparent communication and intelligence sharing, fostering an environment of trust and cooperation. Such collaboration is essential to accurately assess situations that may impact global security and stability. As we navigate these uncertain times, let us be guided by a shared commitment to peace and security. Sierra Leone stands ready to support efforts aimed at de-escalation and peaceful resolution, reaffirming our dedication to a world where diplomacy prevails over discord. In conclusion, Madam President, we further call for full respect of the national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity of both Ukraine and the Russian Federation within their internationally recognized borders, and for the immediate cessation of hostilities. In doing so, we urge for good faith diplomatic efforts addressing the legitimate concerns of the involved parties. In light of recent developments, it is crucial for the international community to promote dialogue to prevent any escalation that may further endanger the peaceful resolution of the conflict in Ukraine through diplomatic means, as was envisaged in Article 33 of the Charter of the United Nations. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Sierra Leone et je passe la parole au représentant de l'Équateur.
Gracias, señora presidenta, y agradezco al subsecretario Yencha por su exposición informativa. Desde el inicio, o desde que inició la invasión a Ucrania, hemos sido testigos de las devastadoras consecuencias del conflicto. Las cifras son estremecedoras. Miles de vidas de civiles perdidas, comunidades destruidas y un número creciente de personas desplazadas que a medida que se aproxima el invierno enfrentan una situación aún más precaria y desesperante. De igual forma, este conflicto continúa exacerbando las tensiones a nivel global y afectando la economía mundial en un momento en el que el mundo debería enfocarse en trabajar unido para afrontar diversos desafíos comunes. Desafortunadamente, la espiral de violencia alimentada por la expansión geográfica del conflicto sigue afectando desproporcionadamente a los más vulnerables, incluyendo mujeres, niños, adultos mayores y personas con movilidad limitada. En diversas regiones de Ucrania, las infraestructuras críticas, incluyendo puertos y centrales energéticas, así como las áreas residenciales, siguen siendo blanco de ataques y han dejado un trágico saldo de víctimas civiles. Los ataques contra civiles y bienes de carácter civil están prohibidos por el derecho internacional, son inaceptables y deben cesar de inmediato. El Ecuador insiste en su llamado a que se facilite el acceso humanitario sin obstáculos, especialmente en las zonas más afectadas del este y sur de Ucrania, y reitera la importancia de evitar cualquier acción que ponga en riesgo la seguridad de las instalaciones nucleares en Zaporilla y Kursk. Señora Presidenta, debe investigarse la reciente información pública sobre la presunta movilización de tropas norcoreanas hacia Rusia para ser desplegadas en este conflicto, pues, de ser confirmada, constituiría un hecho alarmante, peligroso e ilegal. Es fundamental que las partes ejerzan la máxima moderación y prioricen, ante todo, la protección de la población civil. Mi delegación reitera su preocupación de que si el conflicto continúa en esta trayectoria, podríamos acercarnos a un punto crítico sin retorno. El aumento de la retórica nuclear y la intensificación de las hostilidades son motivo de preocupación global. Por ello, los esfuerzos del secretario general y de actores internacionales que buscan poner fin a este conflicto deben respaldarse. El diálogo y la diplomacia no pueden ser consideradas líneas rojas. Para concluir, reafirmo el compromiso del Ecuador con los principios fundamentales del derecho internacional y la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, en especial el respeto a la soberanía, a la integridad territorial y la resolución pacífica de las controversias. En este marco, apoyamos la soberanía, integridad territorial e independencia política de Ucrania y sumamos nuestra voz a quienes exigen a la Federación Rusa la suspensión de sus operaciones militares que permita avanzar hacia una solución negociada que conduzca a una paz justa y sostenible fundamentada en el derecho internacional y los principios de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Gracias, Presidenta.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Équateur et je passe la parole au représentant de la Chine.
主席，我要感谢严洽助理秘书长的通报，我也期待稍后听取乌克兰和朝鲜代表的发言。乌克兰危机已经进入第3个年头，当前地面战事仍在持续，大量无辜平民伤亡，大批基础设施损毁，人道危机日益严重，外溢影响不断显现。中方对此深感痛心和忧虑。我们再次呼吁冲突当事方保持理性克制，切实遵守国际人道法，全力保障平民和民用基础设施安全，避免造成更多的伤害和破坏，避免战争对地区的影响不可挽回。早日恢复和平，推动乌克兰危机实现政治解决，是国际社会的共同愿望，也是世界各国的共同责任。 在这个安理会大厅里，我们一直呼吁冲突当事方展现政治意愿，相向而行，尽早开启和谈，呼吁国际社会为此积极提供帮助，创造有利条件。当前形势的发展又到了一个关键时刻，存在着日趋严峻复杂的风险。我们再次呼吁有关各方遵守战场不外溢、战事不升级、各方不拱火3原则，尽快推动局势降温，防止局势失控。主席，中方在乌克兰问题上的立场是一贯的、明确的，我们始终站在和平一边，站在对话一边，始终致力于劝和促谈、政治解决。正是基于这一立场，我们同巴西联合发表了政治解决乌克兰危机的6点共识，会同有关全球南方国家发起成立了乌克兰危机和平之友小组，希望以此凝聚更多和平共识，为危机政治解决积累条件。我们将继续同有关各方保持沟通接触，为推动政治解决危机发挥建设性作用。最后，刚才一些成员在发言中提到了朝鲜半岛局势，我们在这个大厅里曾多次表明立场。这里我要重申，中方始终认为维护半岛和平稳定，推动半岛问题政治解决进程符合各方共同利益。我们希望各方共同为此做出建设性努力。谢谢主席。
Je remercie le représentant de la Chine et je passe la parole à la représentante de Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and I also thank ASG Yencha for his briefing. Guyana is gravely concerned about the dangerous trajectory of this conflict. Each day, we hear more harrowing reports of the death and destruction brought upon innocent civilians who are bearing the brunt of this conflict. They did not ask for this war, and they have little means of escaping it. We share ASG Yencha's concern about the ramifications of any further escalation of this conflict, and reiterate our call for an immediate end to the unrelenting violence and violations of international law. While the Council's meetings on Ukraine have become predictable and routine, we must resist attempts to normalize this conflict and the suffering of civilians. It is this Council's duty to live up to its responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Bringing the war to an end must therefore be our foremost concern. Madam President, 2.5 years ago, on 23rd of February, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine stood before the General Assembly, pleading for the UN to take swift, concrete, and resolute actions to, and I quote, avert a new devastating catastrophe in Europe, end of quote. He sounded the alarm that day about Russian military forces amassed along the Ukrainian border and warned that every nation would become embroiled in the ensuing crisis if we failed to act. But there was no action from the Security Council. One day later, we all watched in disbelief as Article 2.4 of the UN Charter was violated and the most sacred tenets of international law trampled upon. Much has happened since then. Many more violations have been recorded on both sides of the front line. Homes, schools, hospitals, and other critical civilian infrastructure became the targets of missiles, and innocent civilians, their hapless victims. Almost in real time, we, the members of the Security Council, receive reports of the latest atrocities. Yet, we have been unable to frontally address these violations. Oftentimes, we find ourselves being more spectators as these chambers become a theater for the latest public relations spins. All the while, the death toll and list of casualties continue to climb. Men, women, children, parents, grandparents, and babies. They were all waiting on this council to deliver swift, concrete, and resolute actions to stop the war, to stop the destruction, and to stop the suffering. Instead, we witness lives cut short, futures lost or paused, while pain and suffering multiply. Madam President, we are often told that this war must be won militarily. We're not convinced that this is the only option. This is why we applaud the efforts of those who have decided to work for peace, to develop peace plans and convene peace conferences. We understand that the plans may not individually offer the full spectrum of solutions being sought at this stage, but they are a step in the right direction. They represent an earnest desire of the members of the international community to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Guyana, as a small developing country, will continue to use its voice and seat in this council to support efforts aimed at ending the war and achieving lasting and sustainable peace. As an elected member, we came here with no illusions, but ready and prepared to work for peace. To be clear, our call for peace and dialogue by no means implies an indifference to violations of international law. On the contrary, we affirm that respect for the legal obligations enshrined in the UN Charter and international law must be upheld, and that the acquisition of territory by force must never be condoned. We also continue to call, as we do today, for full respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and for the Russian Federation to withdraw its military forces from the international recognized territory of Ukraine. We will continue to demand that this Council live up to its responsibility and take action to bring about a peaceful end to this war. It is our duty to change the dangerous trajectory this conflict is taking. Madam President, in closing, as you know, the mural that hangs behind you was gifted to the United Nations by the Kingdom of Norway. I think it apt today to recall the words of the Norwegian Foreign Minister, who said that it was meant to inspire those working in this chamber to carry out the core of the United Nations mandate. This is a responsibility that rests upon our shoulders, one that we all chose and promised to uphold, one that we cannot and must not abrogate. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de Guyana. Je passe la parole au représentant de l'Algérie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I thank ASG Miroslav Viencha for his briefing. This is our second meeting in October to discuss the situation in Ukraine. Yet, we will have another meeting tomorrow regarding the same question. This denotes the importance given by the international community and this very council to this issue, as well as the dangerous tensions that mark the conflict, especially during this period. The escalation trend that consistently governs the interactions and around this conflict has always been a source of deep concern for Algeria. From the very beginning of our term at the Security Council, we have always warned that escalation and polarization could lead nowhere but to the worst scenario. But those warnings have not been heeded. Both parties continued to strengthen their military capabilities, seeking a better position in a war that, like any other conflict, would have no winner. On the contrary, every day, this conflict is causing more loss of lives, more destruction, and more harm to both Ukraine and Russia. Furthermore, its political and economic consequences continue to be felt not only in the region, but in the world at large, especially in developing countries. This negative trend must stop. Peace should be the only option, the top priority objective, and the unique leitmotif. Peace should not be lost in the limbo of polarization, misinformation and disinformation, geopolitical calculations or miscalculations, mutual accusations, and divergent perceptions. The United Nations, including our Council, were built on a solid basis that includes the purposes and principles of the UN Charter that we all agree on, as well as the norms of international law. 2, the virtues of diplomacy, dialogue, cooperation, and mutual understanding. 3, the fairness and effectiveness of multilateralism as a privileged platform to overcome complex situations. Therefore, let us make good use of this structure to achieve just and lasting peace. Let us give diplomacy and genuine dialogue the opportunity to deliver. Let us give peace the chance to prevail. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Algérie et je vais maintenant faire une déclaration en ma qualité de représentante de la Suisse. Et je voudrais commencer par remercier le sous-secrétaire général Gyencha de son intervention. Pardon que je prononce toujours ce nom mal. Les faits, les allégations que nous venons d'entendre sont profondément troublantes et, si confirmées, constitueraient non seulement des violations du droit international, mais également une évolution qui risque d'avoir de graves conséquences pour la sécurité européenne, asiatique et globale. Permettez-moi donc d'élaborer ceci. Premièrement, l'aspect légal nous semble très clair. Un tel déploiement de troupes des forces armées par la République populaire démocratique de Corée, si avéré, s'ajouterait au nombre croissant de rapports fondés faisant état du transfert illégal d'armes à la Russie. En effet, toute transaction d'armes avec la RPDC constitue une violation des sanctions de ce Conseil. Cela concerne la vente, l'achat, l'importation et l'exportation d'armes vers ou depuis la RPDC. Selon la résolution 2270, l'accueil de formateurs, de conseillers ou d'autres fonctionnaires à des fins liées à une formation militaire, paramilitaire ou policière est également proscrit. Et alors que la résolution 2397 prévoyait le rapatriement de tous les travailleurs étrangers de la RPDC, il est inconcevable que la présence de milliers de troupes puisse être conciliée avec la lettre et encore moins l'esprit de ces résolutions contraignantes. Ainsi, une violation du droit international en soutiendrait une autre. Les infractions ou sanctions envers la RPDC soutiennent l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Dans ce contexte, la Suisse regrette vivement que la prolongation du mandat du groupe d'experts sur la RPDC ait échoué à cause d'un veto russe, alors que ce groupe menait des enquêtes sur les allégations de transferts illégaux d'armes entre la RPDC et la Russie. Deuxièmement, tout comme la grande majorité des membres de l'ONU, la Suisse condamne l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Il est consternant que, malgré les appels clairs et répétés d'un très grand nombre de membres de l'Assemblée générale et de la Cour internationale de justice, la Russie continue son agression militaire. L'envoi de forces armées pour la soutenir irait à l'encontre non seulement de ces appels, mais aussi de l'esprit de la Charte des Nations Unies elle-même. Nous appelons la RPDC et toutes les tierces parties à s'abstenir de toute action susceptible d'alimenter l'agression militaire russe. Et nous appelons une nouvelle fois la Russie à cesser immédiatement toutes les hostilités et à retirer ses troupes de l'ensemble du territoire ukrainien. Finalement, la sollicitation d'un tel soutien militaire en violation directe des résolutions du Conseil fragiliserait davantage l'architecture de non-prolifération établie depuis un demi-siècle en vertu du traité de non-prolifération. La Russie, en tant qu'État dépositaire, est pourtant appelée à la renforcer, non à l'affaiblir. La possible implication des forces armées de la RPDC dans l'agression militaire russe contre l'Ukraine soulève également le spectre d'un élargissement suprarégional des hostilités. La Russie, en tant que membre permanent de ce Conseil de sécurité, est pourtant appelée à maintenir la paix et la sécurité internationale et non d'en saper les fondations. La Suisse estime que cet organe a la responsabilité et le devoir de répondre à l'appel largement partagé en faveur d'une paix juste et durable en Ukraine. La Suisse continue de soutenir le secrétaire général dans la recherche d'une solution pacifique et reste prête à contribuer à tous les efforts visant à promouvoir la paix conformément à la Charte de l'ONU, en particulier les principes d'intégrité territoriale et de souveraineté. Je vous remercie. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de l'Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Assistant Secretary General Yencha. I would have recognized here Putin's Kappa regime in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union, but it became the practice. He had already left the room. We requested this meeting to address another step taken by Moscow to further escalate its war against Ukraine. At the Security Council meeting on the 21st of October, Ukraine and a number of other delegations raised an issue of the engagement of the DPRK troops into the Russian armed aggression against my country. Since then, the situation has been evolving in a menacing direction. According to available information, the DPRK military personnel, consisting of up to 12,000 servicemen, is being trained at 5 training grounds in the Eastern Military District of the Russian Armed Forces. This contingent includes at least 500 officers of the DPRK Army, with at least 3 generals from the General Staff. Subsequently, it is planned to form at least 5 units or formations from DPRK military personnel consisting of 2,000 to 3,000 servicemen each. One such unit is equivalent to that of a motorized rifle regiment. The DPRK servicemen are supposed to wear Russian uniforms and use Russian small arms. They will also be provided with Russian identity documents. Notably, to conceal their presence, the DPRK servicemen are expected to be integrated into the Russian units manned by representatives of ethnic minorities from the Asian part of Russia. Among them, for instance, is the Special Buryat Battalion of the 11th Separate Air Assault Brigade of the Russian Airborne Forces. According to available information, between October 23 and 28, at least 7 aircraft carrying military personnel of up to 2,100 soldiers flew from the Eastern Military District to the Russia's border with Ukraine. The number of DPRK soldiers expected to be transferred from the Russia's Primorsky Krai by the end of October 2024 may reach 4,500. It is also expected that in November 2024, DPRK military personnel will begin directly participating in combat operations against Ukraine's defense forces. On October 26, 400 DPRK soldiers arrived in the western part of Russia's Kursk region. The area of their deployment was prepared by engineering units of the Moscow military district of the Russian armed forces. Moreover, the preparatory work for deployment of additional DPRK forces in the above area is now underway. The above-mentioned DPRK units will likely operate in the area of responsibility of the 11th Separate Air Assault Brigade. According to information at our disposal, an operational group of 40 DPRK servicemen has been conducting reconnaissance in the area of responsibility of this brigade since October 20th. Madam President, even mice and cockroaches, but not the Russian ambassador in this chamber, know that none of the countries that provide assistance to Ukraine is under the Security Council sanctions. Yet, in its turn, receiving assistance from the fully sanctioned North Korea is a brazen violation of the UN Charter. It goes without saying that sending the DPRK troops to support Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a flagrant violation of international law. Moreover, training by the Russian Federation of DPRK regular units constitutes a violation of Security Council resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. In turn, DPRK soldiers providing or receiving any training or other assistance related to use of arms including ballistic missiles, is also a violation of the mentioned Council's resolutions. And yet, Russia continues its attacks on the DPRK sanction regime, and its final goal seems to be clear: to dismantle the entire system of global deterrence of the Pyongyang regime. We call on the Security Council and its 1718 Sanctions Committee to address the issue of non-compliance of the DPRK and the Russian Federation with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. Madam President, active involvement of the DPRK troops in the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine represents very bad news for the world. It is the most dangerous development over the recent period of the war in terms of its global implications. Building the interoperability of the Russian and DPRK armies constitutes a threat to Europe, the North Korean peninsula, its neighbors, and beyond. Some may reassure themselves that Russia needs DPRK soldiers merely as cannon fodder to continue their meat-grinder assaults against Ukrainian forces. However, this is only part of the truth and not the main point. The Pyongyang regime is not merely supplying its soldiers to Russia. It pursues its own interests and long-term goals. Those DPRK servicemen, especially officers who survived the Russian-Ukrainian war, will return to their region with exceptional experience in modern warfare. One may wonder how the Pyongyang regime plans to utilize these experienced units. The truth is that we all know the answer when we say that the war is gradually expanding from the European theater to the Far East. It is not solely because the entry and the formation points for the DPRK combat units are located there. It is also because they are likely to be used not only in Ukraine. Actually, it speaks volumes that Putin himself, contrary to his usual practice of denying everything, has not denied either the presence of DPRK forces or the far-reach plans that both dictatorships have in this regard. Referring to the article on mutual military assistance in their recent bilateral agreement on comprehensive strategic partnership, Putin openly threatened the world by stating that, I quote, "What and how we will do, that is our own business within the framework of this article." This is nothing more than bullying on a global scale by a criminal who is confident of his own impunity. This behavior is a result of the comforting tolerance which Russia's mafia state enjoys in response to its irresponsible and destructive attitude towards the United Nations and to the Security Council itself. For over 30 years of its presence in the Security Council, Russia has systematically and consistently undermined this body's capability to maintain peace and security. Therefore, nothing unpredictable has happened. This is just another episode of the Rutflix series, which we have all been watching for many years, including in this chamber and on the UN webcast. Just recently, we condemned Russia for dismantling the monitoring mechanism of the DPRK sanctions regime. Now, the sanctions regime itself is under threat. The leniency of the Security Council towards Russia has been stretched so much that it is broken. The Council is broken, and as the Secretary General says, the system does not work for anyone. This is why we call for action. And if the Security Council is immobilized by Russia's presence, then we must seek other formats and forms of such action. We have heard now and then that Russia would never cross this or that red line of the civilized world. But open your eyes. Russia is not crossing your red lines. Russia is walking down a red carpet. a carpet woven from weak responses, unfounded hopes, and complacency. In truth, it is not even a red carpet, but a river of blood, one that began flowing the moment Russia was given the Soviet seat in the chamber in 1991. Do I need to remind anyone whose blood flows in this river? That is why I'm sorry to have heard so much skepticism that Russia would go so far as to openly establish a military alliance with the most notorious rogue state. But why this disbelief? Didn't Ukraine warn of the aggressive nature of the entity called the Russian Federation? Haven't Russia's neighbors, like the Baltic states, warned the same? What else needs to happen for the world to finally accept the truth that Russia will not cease further damaging the cornerstones of global security until they are dismantled or until Russia is stopped? And this is not an alarmist doomsday prediction from a pundit on a political talk show. It is simply a description of what is happening before your eyes, the same Rootflix series we are all watching. Tomorrow there will be a new cheap episode here in the Security Council. Once again, you will have to come and listen to Russia's absurdities about the so-called threats related to supplying weapons to Ukraine. And what is most surprising is that even in the face of the evolving military alliance between Russia and the DPRK, there are still people who are desperately want to believe that limiting Ukraine's ability to defend itself, and now from two nuclear states, will somehow make these states more inclined towards peace. This position is either infantile or cynical. Binding the hands of defending state could only provide a few years of tranquility at the expense of Ukraine, its people, and its infrastructure. And Ukraine will never agree to such a scenario. I do believe that other responsible nations will not agree either. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Ukraine et je passe la parole au représentant de la Lettonie.
Thank you. Madam President, I'm addressing the Council on behalf of 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and my own country, Latvia. We align ourselves with a statement to be delivered by the European Union. We thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Jenča for the comprehensive briefing. Since the beginning of its aggression against Ukraine, Russia, in this very chamber, has been boasting about its inevitable victory. However, the situation on the ground is different. The Kremlin, grappling with ammunition shortages and huge manpower losses, has not only turned to Pyongyang for military supplies, but now even for troop deployment. It is more than alarming that the DPRK has reportedly deployed 10,000 troops to Russia for further possible deployment to Ukraine. Russia has recruited a large number of interpreters while training the DPRK soldiers to use Russian military equipment, including drones. Boots on the ground of the third country's armed forces at the battlefield marks a significant escalation in Russia's aggression against Ukraine. By joining Russia's war of aggression, the DPRK violates the most basic rules of international law enshrined in the UN Charter, namely the prohibition of the use of force and the obligation to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of other states. The Baltic states condemn this fact in the strongest possible terms. We demand Russia to immediately cease all military operations and withdraw all troops and equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Russia must also stop blatantly abusing its UN Security Council permanent member status. As mentioned by Council members, We clearly recall that in March, Russia vetoed extension of the mandate of the panel of experts for the UN Security Council's 1718 Committee on the DPRK. Recently, Russia's foreign minister has claimed that the DPRK's nuclear disarmament is a closed issue. These developments highlight how Russia is willing to exploit its P5 role and shield the DPRK from accountability in exchange for the latter's military support. By pursuing such opportunistic partnership, Russia and the DPRK are posing grave security risks and destabilizing both Europe and Asia with severe global repercussions. We call on the DPRK, also on Belarus and on Iran, to stop their assistance to Russia in waging its cruel war of aggression against Ukraine. The Baltic states also urge China, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, to safeguard principles enshrined in the UN Charter and to exercise its influence on Russia to end its war of aggression against its sovereign neighbor. Madam President, Russia and all accomplices must bear full legal and financial responsibility for their violations of international law. We must spare no effort to ensure comprehensive accountability for all crimes committed by Russia's leaders in Ukraine. Establishment of a special tribunal will serve to prosecute those responsible for the crime of aggression. We encourage other countries to support this proposal. Russia tries to rearrange the international system that only benefits aggressors. Russia tries to tear down what has been built by all of us. We must ensure that the global rules-based order remains resilient in the face of these actions. The Baltic states support just peace in Ukraine, based on Ukraine's peace formula that is rooted in principles of the UN Charter and international law. We encourage all member states of the United Nations to join it. In conclusion, let me reiterate that the Baltic states strongly support Ukraine's exercise of its inherent right for self-defense and reaffirm our full solidarity with Ukraine in restoring its territorial integrity and sovereignty. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Lettonie et je passe la parole maintenant à son Excellence Monsieur Stavros Lambrinidis, chef de la délégation de l'Union européenne auprès de l'Organisation des Nations Unies.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Georgia, as well as Monaco, align themselves with this statement. I would also like to thank ASG Jenscha for his important briefing. Madam President, here we are again, witnessing yet another deeply alarming escalation in Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine. In direct violation of the UN Charter, there's now an expansion of military cooperation between the DPRK and Russia, including through the deployment of DPRK troops to potentially participate in Russia's illegal war of aggression. There must be unequivocal and universal condemnation of these developments with no caveats. Participation of DPRK troops in Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine would constitute an additional serious breach of international law, including the principles of the UN Charter. It would represent a unilateral hostile act by the DPRK at the reckless invitation of Russia, with grave consequences for European and global peace and security. The European Union is ready to explore necessary actions as a response in coordination with international partners. DPRK must immediately stop providing support to Russia's illegal war efforts. In June, just this June, the Security Council discussed DPRK's illegal and destabilizing behavior as demonstrated by its continued pursuit of nuclear and ballistic missile programs, as well as its deepening military cooperation with Russia, particularly through arms transfers. These arms transfers openly violate UNSC resolutions and undermine peace and security in Europe and on the Korean Peninsula. The DPRK's ongoing support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine illustrates how closely linked European security is to that of the Indo-Pacific. With this disturbing shift of position on the denuclearization of the DPRK, Russia relinquishes its key obligation from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, including to prevent nuclear proliferation, and violates multiple Security Council resolutions adopted with Russia's support. Russia's deepening military cooperation with the DPRK sends also a clear message, as if one were needed, that it is not sincerely interested in a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace. Instead, Russia is escalating its aggression by desperately seeking any help for its war, including from actors that are disrupting global peace and security. The EU strongly condemns third countries' continued support for Russia's war of aggression and urges them to cease all assistance. This includes not only direct military support, but also the provision of dual-use goods and sensitive items that sustain Russia's military-industrial base. President, tomorrow, Russia has once again convened this Council in an attempt to divert attention and resources from its aggression against Ukraine and the dramatic consequences for Ukraine and the world. It is an abuse of the UN system. Ukraine enjoys an inherent right to self-defense and to regain full control of all of its territory within its internationally recognized borders. Supporting Ukraine and its people to defend themselves from Russia's aggression is therefore legitimate and fully in line with international law and the UN Charter. We will continue to support Ukraine and to defend the UN Charter in response to Russia's aggression, and we will do so for as long as it takes. Madam President, the European Union strongly supports a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, based on the UN Charter. Under the Charter, Russia, the aggressor, must withdraw all its troops from the entire territory of Ukraine. It must stop attempting to annex illegally occupied territories, stop targeting civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure, and most certainly stop recruiting foreign troops to help it expand its war. Colleagues, any serious proposals for peace must be based on the UN Charter and international law as clearly laid out by UN General Assembly in its resolutions. All countries desiring a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace should keep conveying this UN message loudly and clearly to Russia's leadership. Thank you.
Je remercie son Excellence M. Lambrinidis de sa déclaration et je passe la parole au représentant de la République populaire démocratique de Corée.
Thank you, Madam President. Under the coercive demand of the United States in the following forces, UN Security Council convened again unlawful meeting, which is clearly run counter to the fundamental spirit of the UN Charter to promote development, friendly relations, and cooperation among nations. I strongly denounce the United States and its followers for holding this meeting to distort a sense of the situation out of their hostile policies and sordid political motives against DPRK and Russian Federation. If UN Security Council has to convene a meeting, it should duly call into question the crime against the humanity of Israel and its accomplice of the United States. Israel massacred tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians, including women and children, using the weapons of the mass destruction provided by the United States. Should UN Security Council hold a meeting, it will have to naturally take issue with Ukraine's aggressive act of invading the Russian People's Sacred Territory of the Kursk, the killing civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure. Those countries that call for this meeting, including the United States, are main culprits of the destructing peace that inflicted serious harm on the global peace and security, staking their fate on aggression against the sovereign state and interference in their internal affairs. Such fact itself clearly proves the unlawful nature of this meeting. Today, Ukraine's situation is the leading crisis in security environment of Europe. It was caused by the United States and the West, which infringed upon legitimate security interests of the sovereign state by pursuing NATO's reckless eastward advance and expansionist policy. Since outbreak of the Ukrainian situation, the United States and the West have escalated their supplies of the various lethal equipment to the Kiev Authority, including main battle tanks, fighter planes, cluster, and depleted uranium bombs. They also gave green light to using those weapons to strike Russian territory. Emboldened by them, the Ukraine launched missile strike in last June on Russian territory Sevastopol with US-supplied ATACMS, causing over 150 innocent civilian casualties, including children. In August, it invaded Kursk, killing numerous civilians through indiscriminate missile and drone attacks. It is open secret now that the United States and the West are systematically providing Ukraine with intelligence data from reconnaissance satellites targeted with precision-guided weapons, even putting mercenaries into the country. Out of their hopeless ambitions to inflict strategic defeat on Russia, US lead NATO and the West instigate the Kiev Authority to seek confrontation, only to plunge Ukrainian situation into the phase of a protracted war and bring Love to the brink of the New World War. All facts undisputably prove that the hysterical reaction of the United States and the West to convene this meeting today is aimed at covering up their crime of inviting prolonged Ukrainian situation and diverting focus of public opinion elsewhere. The biggest threat to international peace and security at the present is the act of the United States, its ally against peace, who are obsessed with hegemonic ambition to stir up confrontation and conflict among countries, while making frantic efforts to strengthen their aggressive alliance and war moves. From several decades ago, the United States has kept in constant stand by hundreds of thousands of aggressive forces and the latest military hardware on and around the Korean Peninsula, the world's the most dangerous hotspot, under the pretext of the strengthening alliance, and it staged dozens of the war exercises of various kinds and type against the DPRK annually, posing serious threats to peace and security in the region. Recently, the alliance between the United States and ROK has evolved into a nuclear-based military bloc and nuclear war alliance into the sense of the word, which is in sharp contrast to the past. Thus, nuclear threat against DPRK today has become all more actualized and maximized. Such being the case, the United States brought together its following forces to convene Security Council meeting targeting independent sovereign state. It cannot but a mockery of an insult to the UN Charter. The DPRK and Russian Federation are entitled to develop overall bilateral relations in all fields, including politics, economy, military, and cultures, in full conformity with recognized norms of international law under the Treaty on the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership concluded between two countries. If Russia's sovereignty and security interests are exposed to and threatened by continued dangerous attempts of the United States and the West, and if it is judged that we should respond to them with something, we will make a necessary decision. Pyongyang and Moscow maintain close contact with each other on mutual security and development of the situation. The international community should never tolerate the high-handedness and arbitrariness of the United States its followers in the attempt to impose hegemonic and unipolar system domination, but will have to wage courageous struggle to safeguard genuine international justice and global peace and stability. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la République populaire démocratique de Corée. Le représentant des États-Unis a demandé la parole pour faire une autre déclaration. Je la lui donne.
Thank you, Madam President. I need to take the floor to respond to the comments made by the representative of the Kim regime. I would remind everyone, this is a regime that has violated multiple UN Security Council resolutions and with regard to its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. That's the important point here. And the activities that it's carrying out in support of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, particularly through the deployment of troops to Russia, which we expect will be used in Ukraine, is a dangerous, very dangerous escalation of the situation. The other troubling factor here is this destabilizing activity has the support of 2 permanent members of the Security Council, and we all know those countries to which I'm referring. And these destabilizing activities are a major threat to peace and security, not only in Europe, but in the Indo-Pacific. Should DPRK's troops enter Ukraine in support of Russia, they will surely return in body bags. So I would advise Chairman Kim to think twice about engaging in such reckless and dangerous behavior. Thank you, Madam President.
Merci. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs ou d'oratrices inscrits sur la liste. La séance est levée.
La 9763e séance du Conseil de sécurité reprend. Je rappelle aux orateurs et aux oratrices qu'ils sont priés de limiter la durée de leur intervention à 3 minutes maximum afin que le Conseil puisse mener ses travaux dans les meilleurs délais. Le voyant rouge de leur micro se mettra à clignoter au bout de 3 minutes pour les inviter à conclure. Je donne maintenant la parole aux représentants de l'Inde.
Mr. President, at the outset, I thank you for convening this quarterly open debate. I also thank the briefers for their remarks. The world has been witnessing human suffering and destruction of a large scale in the ongoing conflict for a period of more than 12 months. Tens of thousands have lost their lives and many more have been injured. Civilian infrastructure, including schools and hospitals, have been damaged. It is estimated that reconstruction efforts in Gaza would take years together. Mr. President, the people of Palestine are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. We have been calling for safe, timely, and unimpeded humanitarian supply to the affected population. As we have repeatedly demonstrated in the past, India stands ready to do more for the Palestinian people.